into Market Insight for a Monday edition. I am David Chiedu. On the program this morning, we're looking at Nigeria's accreditation by the Green Climate Fund. Now, climate change has become an existential threat to humanity as extreme weather conditions have caused devastating effects on livelihoods, depletion of grazing lands for livestock, rising sea levels causing excessive flooding that displaces communities, changing rainfall patterns that negatively affect agricultural yields, poor water and air quality that impact health, and extensive loss of biodiversity. We're talking plants and animal species, among other implications. Now, this, therefore, has prompted countries and various entities all over the world to make deliberate and concerted efforts to tackle this particular problem. Now, last week, the Development Bank of Nigeria PLC, DBN, secured accreditation for the Green Climate Fund, GCF, enabling it to access between $50 million and $250 million in funding for climate change projects. Now, this landmark accreditation essentially positions the DBN as the first direct access entity in Nigeria, granting it direct access also to GCF resources without intermediaries. Now, we discuss this today, how impactful this particular accreditation could be for Nigeria in its fight against the effects of climate change. Joining us this morning on the conversation are Ms. Ngozi Edum. She's a social and climate justice advocate focusing on mostly affected people and areas. She also leads partnership and innovation at DEAN. Good morning, Ms. Edum. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Right, good morning. And also joining us is Mr. Ebi Bozimo. He's a public policy expert and an energy analyst. Good morning, Mr. Bozimo. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, good morning, David. Good morning to the fellow commentator. Good morning to all of your wonderful listeners out there.
Now let's take a look at what happened last week on the trading floor of the Nigerian Exchange Limited. So at the end of last weekend, or last weekday rather, of trading on the NGX, a total of 1,103,330,581 shares in 9,098 deals, corresponding to a market value of 21,596,855,074 were traded, compared with the previous NGX trading day, Thursday, that is, July 25. Friday's data shows 201% improvement in volume, 214% improvement in turnover, and 11% improvement in deals. Now, the current market capitalization of the Nigerian Stock Exchange is 55.6 trillion naira. And in the aggregate, 116 NGX listed equities participated in trading, ending with 17 gainers and 25 losers. Owando led the gainers chart with 10% share price appreciation, closing at 20 naira 35 kobo per share, followed by FCMB Group going up by 8.22%. Wapik Insurance went up by 7.5%, and Consolidated Hallmark Holdings went up by 6.15%. On the losing side, Eterna came out last with an end-of-day price depreciation of 10% at 16 naira 20 kobo per share, followed by Dangote Cement going down by 9.99%, Dar Communications 9.62%, and Macure Industries also down by 9.5%. Regarding the performance of NGX market indices, the benchmark all-share index declined by 1,955.47 points to close at 98,201.49, representing a one-week loss of 2.33%, a four-week loss of 1.85%, but an overall year-to-date gain of 31.33%. And that's the stock market report this morning on Market Insight. Now, today we are taking a look at what Nigeria has been able to achieve by way of securing funding for climate change activities. Last week, we saw what happened with the DBN, talking about the Development Bank of Nigeria PLC, securing accreditation from the Green Climate Fund, GCF, enabling it to have access to sums of money to the tune of 50 to 250 million US dollars. Now, what that means for the country's fight against the scourge of climate change and its myriad of effects, including on desertification, if you're talking about flooding, storms, and in other key sectors of the economy, power, agriculture, and the rest. That's exactly where we're focusing our attention on this morning on the program. We discuss how impactful this accreditation could be for Nigeria in its fight against the effects of climate change vis-a-vis key sectors. And as I introduced earlier, joining us this morning, Ms. Ngozi Edum, a social and climate justice advocate who focuses on mostly affected people and areas. She also leads partnership and innovation at Dean. She joins us this morning, as well as Mr. Ebi Bozimo, who's a public policy expert and energy analyst. I'm going to start with you, Ms. Edum, your thoughts on this. Now, we know that this indeed is a milestone. It's not just for the DBN, it is for Nigeria as a whole, given the opportunity that it does provide for the country to build resilience in the fight against the effects of climate change, including the all-critical global warming, unpredictable rainfall patterns, storms, floods, etc., as I mentioned earlier. So I'm curious as to what the significance, in your view, that is, would be the significance of this particular accreditation, what it would be, and how the funding will impact Nigeria's effort to, really address climate change issues. We'll start with you, Ms. Edum.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel that it's a very milestone for us because critical to fighting climate change, the issue of finance, it's a huge concern. And although the money that we've been able to access is good, but it's still, if I will be honest, it's still a long way to achieve the money that we need to fight climate change. And it depends on now how we want to kind of put this money. Are we going to focus on putting it in fighting desertification or deforestation, which Nigeria has the highest rate of deforestation in Africa? And are we going to focus it on energy? We know that fossil fuel contributes, the power sector, contributes highly to GHG emissions. So it depends on how we now want to put this money. But it's still very, it's a success story. It's one that is commendable, and we look forward to how the country wants to use this money and in what aspect that they want to use this money. Thank you.
I'm going to take your thoughts, throw it over to Ebi, see what he thinks about where perhaps we could channel that quote-unquote resource, if you like. So Ebi, let me come to you, Mr. Bozimo. Now, we are, as a nation, transitioning to a low-carbon economy, as it were. So I'm curious, based off of what Ms. Edum has just said, I'm curious as to what you think should be the specific areas or projects, as you were, that should be prioritized at this point in time by the DBN following the accreditation and the possibilities of the fundings that will be received?
Now, global warming, climate change is in many cases caused by activities of man, especially in developed countries, and many of the people who benefit from the GCF investments are in least developed countries, African countries, and small island developing states. Now, here in Nigeria, it's a milestone, like Mr. Edum has said, to get that funding allocated to us. But there often seems to be a gap between the funding and its application and execution. So the Nigerian Development Bank is really set up to deal with small, medium, and other such industries. And you have to ask yourself, many of those industries, are they in a position to be big players in the areas of climate change, we're talking about transitioning to a green environment or to better, sustainable power sources. Almost everybody in Nigeria right now has no choice but to use a generator. Maybe the kind of places we could put emphasis on is creating mini grids where people are not individually running their own power, but they have collective power that they can be billed for. You can look for where you can improve solar and inverter systems to run certain types of businesses. Not all businesses are compatible with that, but those are some of the areas you can do it. And then we did talk about desertification, deforestation, and flooding. There could be, depending on the amount of funding available, there could be efforts put in place to ensure that flooding is minimized or the impact is minimized, because flooding has a way of destroying access to agricultural areas, harvests, and people's lives in general. So climate change has this devastating effect. You have uncertainty with your climate. Rain comes when you don't expect it comes, often too much. Sometimes you have drought. It's very choppy. I think what can be done is to mitigate the worst effects of climate change. So that takes some studying, some record keeping, some observation, and then building in that resilience so that when there's too much rain, we have a way of handling that. When there's not enough rain, we have a way of dealing with that. It's never going to be one size fits all because of the different climatic areas and geographical areas of the country. But with proper study and proper attention to localized challenges that arise, you can apply that funding. Sometimes it can be physical infrastructure. Sometimes it may have to be social infrastructure, ways to maintain ongoing education for people. You might have to relocate people for a time, make sure that the children don't stop their educational, endeavors. There is going to be a variety of solutions, but I think one of the first that could be very useful is in energy projects, mini grids to create energy for productive activity.
Mr. Ebi, I'm going to take you up on that much later on when you talk about the provision of energy. There's been some talks across some corridors that climate change effects have climate change issues have seriously depleted our chances, if you like, at harnessing hydropower. We're going to get to that later on. That's just one of the sectors which is quite critical when it comes to the issues of climate change. But then again, you talked about localizing it. Let's talk about how it does indeed trickle down to businesses, Nigerian businesses that is, and communities. What are your thoughts on this?
There are many plazas, as they are called, around this country, where as you are approaching the plaza, you hear this racket. Every single individual has their own individual generator. You go through a phalanx of heat waves where everybody is running things. And that is, one, unhealthy from an audio point of view, and also from the emissions. So what you could do is say, okay, at this location, even if you have to put one main soundproof gas-powered plant to run all the electricity in an area, that would be a way of minimizing the sheer impact of everybody having their individual thing. Of course, you have to make the figures moderate enough for people to afford them. Otherwise, people will not sign up. So there's this delicate balancing act, I would say, in such situations. In certain areas where periodically, when the floods come, water rises and there's widespread flooding, you might have to do geological surveys and create dams, even if they're just embankments, to help people manage their lives in the worst of times. Then in those areas in the middle belt, the food basket, where floods have been devastating some of our agricultural, productivity, you have to go there and properly channel the water, create detention ponds, create facilities where you can manage that water in such a way that you don't destroy the hard work and labor of very diligent farmers. So, and then of course, desertification. We had the former WhatsApp program, the the Great Green Belt or something, where we're trying to plant trees, give people the encouragement, but of course, enhance the security, because nobody wants to go to those areas and end up being killed because they are trying to improve the climate at the border of the Sahara Desert, where, that Sahara is coming down further and further into Nigeria. These are just sample projects that can be looked at, and these funds can add aspects and elements. Because what I think about the Development Bank of Nigeria is that its focus is certainly not a commercial bank. It's supposed to be like a correspondent bank for small and medium scale businesses to get access to loans, and it kind of guarantees them somehow. So I don't know that they're directly giving loans to people, but they are standing in the breach in case people don't pay back. So they're able to guarantee the loans people get. I ask myself, they're getting the funding is great. Will it pass through to the people who actually need it when they need it without excessive amounts of bureaucracy? These are questions and concerns I have.
Now let's come back to you, Ms. Edum. So in your view, how exactly does this accreditation align with Nigeria's broader climate change goals and its strategies? And I ask this deliberately because Nigeria has a nationally determined contributions arrangements under the Paris Agreement, yes, which sets forth commitments to, mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and promote sustainable development. Now, we made our first, submission in, 2015. And revised that in 2021, which was more or less a recommitment, if you like, to its unconditional contribution of reducing emissions by 20% below the business as usual scenario by the year 2030. And also, increased our conditional target to 47% reduction in emission by the same year. So how exactly will the DBN ensure that, the funded projects will align with Nigeria's, nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement and other wider strategies for combating climate change?
Yeah, thank you. I want to say that we have lots of policies or strategies in reducing emission, and you mentioned the NDCs. And then I know we have the Nigeria Energy Transition Plan, and we have lots of dates. It's finding a way to align all our commitments, right? And the conditional our commitment to the industry, the conditional commitment is that when we have this kind of funding from external bodies, then we'll be able to reduce to 47%. And I think the GCF is one of those conditions that getting this funding would help us to reduce. So I think we have a lot of commitments, a lot of plans. It's aligning all these plans in order to know which critical sector that needs this money, like the other speaker mentioned, like we need to make sure that those that really need this money have access to this money. And these are the small and medium scale industry. Do they get access to this funding in order to drive the change? It doesn't have to be a top bottom approach. I would rather go for a bottom top approach, because the people that suffer most of this are in our local communities that do not have the education, they do not have the technology to build a resilient communities. And we have flooding all over the world. But when you look at the impact on developed countries and developing countries, you'll find out that the impact is much on the developing countries because they lack the technology to do this. So we need to align all our plans, our policies to the Sustainable Development Goals and our National Development Plan. And when we do this, we'll be able to know which sector that needs this money critically and ensure that people that need this money have access to this money. Because one thing is to get the money, and then the other thing is how is this implemented? Yeah, thank you.
Right. Now, I'm going to push that as well to you, Mr. Bozimo. What are your thoughts on how we can, align this with our broader climate change goals and strategies? Based off of my
the question
analogy, piggybacking off of our NDC vis-a-vis the Paris Club agreement.
Now, the question is, how much sensitivity is actually being done by, let's say, the National Orientation Agency and all sorts of other agencies that have to make people understand. I know it would be popular in Nigeria to say, I never chop, now climate change concern me. But the truth is, a connection has to be drawn. Creative communication must make people understand that there is a connection between even the challenges you are facing and your response to climate change, or your responsibility for your piece of climate change. So when we say Nigerian climate change goals, honestly, I am actually an edge expert. I specialize in making sustainable designs possible. So I'm very conscious of it. But you find in talking generally, it's not well established in people's minds. So I do my part, but I can only do it to the few I engage with. You have to have larger bodies. We've had in the recent times, in the run-up to this interesting proposed protest, a lot of communication from governments about not doing the protest. That same energy could and should be used to telling us about things like energy transition, climate change effects, ways to mitigate it, and so on. The energy exists, but we seem to pull it out only for certain things and not for other things. So just to, to key into the question, how we can do it is to create a very particular communication strategy at all levels, in different dialects, in different geographical areas, to be very specific. If you're telling somebody in the Niger Delta region, where I'm from, about desertification, it will make absolutely no effect. Same as if you're telling somebody in Kano about flooding, it may not be impactful. So you have to divide the country, identify the problems that are localized, and make messages that will resonate with those people. And when you get the ordinary person to adapt these policies themselves, I believe you will be able to carry your message much further, because people become much more conscious. But right now, it may be high and far away from the day-to-day concerns of people. So it's important for people to see that even their day-to-day concerns could be improved, or their lives improved, if climate change is kept uppermost in mind. I think government has a role to play, and that is at all levels. We recently have the passing of the local government autonomy bill. At the ward level, there should be a small department or office that goes around on your street, in your neighborhood, in your little locality, making observations and making solutions available to boys playing football on the streets, ladies plaiting their hair, the woman selling tomatoes. Everybody has to be part of this for it to become part of our way of life.
I'm going to stay with you for this next one to move it further. Now, looking at the global scene, some notable already accredited entities, as well as countries as well. The entities we're talking about: the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Africa Development Bank, and so on. Additionally, several countries involved. We're talking China, we're talking India, the United Kingdom, amongst others. Now, given their current position vis-a-vis climate change actions and whatnot, of course we can learn something from them. But is there a possibility, perhaps, that we could go one better, Mr. Bozimo?
I would argue that we don't even have the level of development and industrialization that many of those other countries you mentioned have. So we actually have what you could describe as a clean slate, where we could evolve much more efficient methodologies for dealing with climate change. Many of those countries have a problem with all this Paris Accord and all that, because it sounds to them like their economic activities could be constrained. We, unfortunately, thus far, have not attained those levels of development. So starting now with the right mindset, we can actually develop much more environmentally friendly ways of developing. Development must not always follow the former patterns. We could evolve novel patterns that preserve the environment and still create economic prosperity for our people. So yes, we could go one better. I argue, I support that notion.
Now, in your view, now I'm coming to you, Mr. Edum. In your view, what should be the immediate next step for the DBN, that's the Development Bank of Nigeria, having gotten this far with getting accredited? Of course, as we were made to understand by the managing director of said bank, we're getting loans, and it'll be just channel towards certain special projects, as it were, until we can get to the point where we start to secure grants and the rest of them. So in the immediate term, what do you think should be the step that they should, follow almost as a matter of, immediacy, so to speak?
I would say that it's best they do like a quick analysis by identifying the sector that needs help the most, right? And also looking at all our climate policies and where we have made commitments, and look at that because it also has to align with our international pledges. And how do they make sure that, like, sometimes we don't mention the private sector. The private sectors have a key role to play in others. So how do they bring in the private sector? How do they empower young people to have access to this loan in order to pilot a lot of maybe medium-sized projects like the other speaker said, we have places in Abuja that we have plazas running on diesel. Is there a way that we have smaller companies that can access this loan and provide like a small grid, and they would also make some kind of profit from it? So they have to do a feasibility study. Which sector requires this money, and how do they open up this to private individuals or small scale businesses in order to kind of leverage this loan in order to drive development? So that would be my advice. Opening up because we know that most banks, like, the process of getting this money can be very hard, especially for small scale businesses. So maybe if they can have a way to make this not to be very difficult for these businesses, and also aligning both our local agreement to the our international pledge, that would be my quick advice on that. Yeah.
I was asking you, Mr. Edum, about your thoughts following what you said about some young people wanting to get into it. And I made a little more specificity to enthusiasts across all walks of life who are interested in getting into this particular space, per se, to champion certain causes that push further the idea of climate change advocacy and whatnot, but, always seem to be met with certain bureaucratic niceties. What are your thoughts on how more people can be brought into the fray?
Yeah, I would like to say that young people in Nigeria are already just not leading advocacy. They are already developing solutions to the climate change. We have a lot of young people championing recycling projects, helping to solve the issue of plastic waste. We have a lot of young people using waste to do a lot of innovative projects. Okay, so young people are already not just talking about it or advocating about it, but they have already taken their own personal initiative to solve this. And in Nigeria, we always have this problem of sectors not cooperating. So I want to see the work of the Ministry of Youth in bringing these young people together. We have this DBN now. A lot of young people might not be aware on how to leverage this. So it's the work of both the Ministry of Youth Development and, like Mr. Bozimo, sorry if I pronounce that wrong, mentioned, what is the work of the Nigeria Orientation Agency? Because, like, we are talking about the protest. Like, they didn't have to do like an advert on the television, but young people are galvanizing themselves to do this. So that should be how the government should also take proactive measures in bringing in sectors that affect young people, and know that because Nigeria and Africa will be the young continents, young country and young continent, and climate change affects our generation. So we need to also participate in developing solutions, in participating in policies, participating in knowing how to access this fund in order to drive this change. So I think this is the work of the Ministry of Youth, working together with all sectors that affect young people in finding a way that young people can play more active role and have the support that they need in order to drive the solution that we need against climate change.
Now, over to you, Mr. Bozimo. as I mentioned, I was going to take you up on your on the tangent which you were going toward much earlier, where you talked about the effects of climate change on key sectors, mentioning power or mentioning energy, as it were. So to push that a little further, let's focus it on hydropower generation. It's been a little bit of a concern lately. So I'm curious as to what your thoughts are with regards to how climate change has affected and is affecting this particular sector, talking about the operation, reliability, generation and maintenance of hydropower plants in the country, and what exactly can be done across the board to ensure that the problems cease forthwith.
As we know, hydro plants are driven by moving water, and normally in siting them and operating them, there is a projection of a certain minimal volume that's going to be in a reservoir and going to pass over the very expensive and sophisticated equipment to generate power. With the climate change happening, you have situations where, like the dam in Cameroon, has to just release water every so often because it's overburdened. You have other parts of the country where you see literally dry riverbeds. I've been to Asaba once and looked across the River Niger, and it was almost as though you could walk on the base of the River Niger across. So we have these very wide variances in water for hydropower, and that can never be good or efficient for hydro plants. When you have this huge water at one point, you have to cool down the dam. You have very low water at one time, you have to cool down. You don't have the constant power available. And that, of course, will affect what is available to be generated and fed into the grid and all the downstream communities and facilities. Hydroelectric dams also help with plant irrigation. When the water supply is no longer as reliable as it used to be in terms of its flow, it might be the same amount, but if it all falls down in 3 days, you don't need it then. If an amount of water that will come down in 1 month, come down in 1 week, is destructive, even though it's water. So these are the problems that this climate change, the kind of havoc it's wreaking in the area specifically of hydroelectric power. That said, we have the opportunity to assess these things. From what Ms. Ngozi was saying, information is the number one thing. Information and organization. We have very vibrant Nigerian citizens, youth and otherwise, who can be reached with proper organization. It doesn't have to be the last mile person, but somebody who's an intermediary. Think about this, $250 million at 1 to 1,500. Right now, what we have to avoid is a competition for authority and a feeding frenzy. From what I learned, the National Development Bank is actually only in a position to give project management oversight. It's not necessarily going to be handing out these loans. So we must avoid, what the president recently said, where you have different people competing for authority over that money. It must be understood that the money is supposed to go to medium and small businesses, and it's supposed to allow those businesses overcome challenges that they encounter due to climate change and other such effects. People have to stay on message and stay on mission. Don't now see it as a slush fund with which to prosecute, maybe politics or other things that are not directly connected to climate change. I think what might help us is if the nation creates a climate czar, somebody who will, like Ms. Ngozi said, put together the various policies at the federal level, state levels, environmental policies, the treaties we've signed with everybody, and then roll out in collaboration with every level of government what needs to be done by whom and when. If we establish that kind of role, then there'll be a clearinghouse where the youth with their modern day smartphones and access to information can log in. You see, that fund is now here. but it has to be made, the information has to be made available to people. And people have to understand that it is for their purpose. But as part of it, you must have a format that you can submit your proposal or your loan request. And there has to be a way to guarantee the loan and also to monitor what you say you need to do it. We're not, this is not rocket science. We're not reinventing the wheel. There are ways and means by which these funds are rolled out. We just have to establish one or two of such ways and put them in place without fear or favor, and then we can get the benefits of that green climate fund.
Interesting use of the title or term Tsar. Now, when you say Tsar, it just brings to mind the early 20th century Russian leader or emperor at the time. Nice one. By the way, I also want to dig further into this one. I'm curious as to what investors and policymakers alike would think or how inclined they will be to pushing this particular ideology further. So in your view, I'm going to stick with you as well, Ebi, how will this climate change effect, or climate change fight rather, affect the economic viability of said projects, said hydropower projects, in the country, and what are the implications for policy makers and for investors alike? Very quickly.
I think one of the things we must do is not to think that every project has to be a multi-trillion dollar project. There are, like we said, mini grids. There could even be some relatively minor hydropower projects that may not be able to carry 10,000 homes, or can carry 1,000 homes in a village. At the end of the day, we have gas flaring. How about we take some of that gas and turn it into a crude turbine and generate power for one locality right near there, or 3 localities? We have to get out of the mentality of thinking that every project must cost multiple billions of dollars. Some hundreds of $1,000 projects can improve lives. We have to also pick those, consider them low-hanging fruit, and execute them. The key is execution. There's a gap between the policies and the people, and that gap is to be filled in by effective execution and project management.
Mr. Edum, just to get your thoughts as we round up, key research gaps have been seen to exist, and data as well with regards to these sort of causes. So how exactly, or what impacts, exactly would these have on, climate change, or the climate change fight, as you were, and overall specifying the hydropower generation in the country? Very quickly, your thoughts on this.
I think, do we really have a research gap on it? I think there's a lot of study that's been done already, but how do we bring about all the studies and know what is needed? That's the key issue. Sometimes when they say we don't have data in Nigeria, I struggle to agree with that. I think we have a lot of data, but like moving from policy making to filling in this gap by execution, it's what the problem is. Like the hydrocarbon, we should not only stick to hydrocarbon. Can we also fund projects in solar? We can do that because we have a large amount of sun that we're not using. So we don't need to invest all this money on hydrocarbons because of the issue of droughts and changing pattern of rainfall. So that's a concern. So can we invest in solar? Can we also, in the meantime, use natural gas as a transition gas to addressing the climate change? We as a country, we have the huge reserve of natural gas. I know that recently we talked about building a pipe from Morocco to Germany to supply them with natural gas. So can we also use it to power our communities? Can we build a mini grid that can supply communities, smaller communities? We don't have to invest all the money in hydrocarbon. We have solar. We have alternatives that we can do in the meantime. Yeah.
Very much, Mr. Edum, and of course, Mr. Bozimo, for joining us on the program this morning. Ms. Ngozi Edum is a partner and innovator at Dean, and she has joined us this morning on the conversation. And Mr. Ebi Bozimo as well is a public policy expert and an energy analyst. Many thanks for joining us both gentleman and lady, for joining us this morning on the program. Do appreciate your time. That's Market Insight today. But before we go, let's take a look at the currency market. But in closing, however, this collaboration, as you were, the DBN and the GCF will bode well for the country. And of course, as the analysts have said, it will essentially help build resilience in our fight against the effects of climate change. As I mentioned much earlier, global warming, unpredictable rainfall patterns, storms, floods, and the rest of them. It would also assist the country's efforts towards achieving sustainable development, promotion of environmentally friendly technologies in key sectors of the economy. And now to the currency market. We're taking a look at the official as well as the parallel market. The dollar at the official market is trading to the naira at 1,530 naira, to the pound sterling at 1,999 naira, to the euro at 1,691 naira. And over at the parallel market, the dollar to the naira straight is 1,620 naira, and it's also to the pound sterling at 2,076 naira, and the euro at 1,756 naira. That is the currency market update on the program this morning. Many thanks for joining us. Do join us, to keep a date rather, with us tomorrow for another scintillating episode of Market Insight. Many thanks again for watching. I am David Chiedu. To stay close to SOUQ News Television. Have a wonderful day.